Hi, this is Robert Clinkenbeard and David Anderson with the Commercial Landscaper Podcast. We're going to take 20 minutes of your life to deliver some amazing content from accomplished leaders and business owners to provide you some value, to help you scale your business, to become a better father, and push yourself to higher goals personally. We hope you really enjoy these shows, and we really encourage you to share this with your friends and network to help share these messages. I'm super excited to announce a new partnership we have with Site Recon. If you're tired of measuring properties, the Site Recon platform fully automates the measurements so you can then focus on sales. Think measurements, think Site Recon. Today, we are excited to welcome Kevin Kehoe, who has been in the landscape industry for 30 years, and he's a well-respected name, initially as a consultant, but now as a founding member to one of the top industry software companies, Aspire, used by many of the top 100 companies. Thank you, Kevin, for your time today. Cheers. Okay, good welcome everyone. Robert Clinkenbeard and Dave Anderson with the Commercial Landscaper Podcast. We are really excited to welcome Kevin Kehoe here today. So welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, David.
So Kevin, just give me a quick overview of who you are. Give us a little bit of your background.
Certainly. Been in the landscape industry as a consultant for about a quarter of a century, starting in 1989, believe it or not. And in 2014, kind of retired from that business, the consulting business, and then started a company called the Aspire Software Company, which is a vertical landscape management ERP system, right? Kind of does everything to run a landscape snow construction company's business. So that's what I've been doing since 1989. Prior to that, I started out in the consulting world with, at that time, was the Big Eight. I was with a company called Coopers & Lybrand, and the rest of that, beyond that's ancient history. So.
Cool. That's some tremendous experience. It's actually interesting, Kevin, because every time I talk to somebody in the industry, your name seems to pop up.
So I was very busy. I worked hard. It was my life kind of thing, you know. I mean, I had worked in Coopers & Lybrand, which you work with, you know, the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, and I never really enjoyed that environment terribly. I like work with smaller companies, and so just by happenstance, somehow I got asked to do a talk for the landscape industry, which I had no idea in 1988 it even existed. And I decided that I could make a living in it as a consultant. So I took the time to learn about it. And over the years, I got involved in a lot of things, but I got pretty well known for doing benchmarking studies. I was always a financial guy, right? That was my background. And then ultimately I went into the sales because that's what I was at Aspire. I was the sales marketing part of the company, right? So
cool. That's great background. And with that background, if you've been in the industry for obviously 30 years, you've seen a lot of changes. So as you've seen those changes, and we've obviously been going through an interesting year in 2020 or 2020, where do you see the industry going in the future?
You know, it's an amazingly great industry. I mean, I love it because of the people, essentially, right? I've made a lot of friends over the years in the industry. I mean, it's salt of the earth people. They're contractors, right? They're and that's good and bad, right? You know, for growing the industry. But the industry is done amazingly well over 30 years. I think there are some things going forward, right, that are important for someone in the industry to understand. Number one, it's huge. There's just tons of PE money coming into the space, right? So consolidation is a very real thing, and for an individual contractor, that means there is an exit, right? Multiples are good. The Aspire Software Company, we are the operating system for, I think, most of the big PE guys and the acquirers, you know, outside of Brightview and maybe one other, Monarch, but we run everyone else, right? So that's a big deal, right? That there's an exit and that there's good, solid multiples in the industry because it gives people options. Number two, I think, is important is technology is, I think, when I say technology, I mean software related, hardware type of stuff, right? That ties in data and information, right? The cloud has changed the world. Mobile has changed the world. SQL database has changed the world, right? Where at a relatively cheap price, right, an average contractor can buy a pretty impressive system, right, to run their businesses, which, used to be QuickBooks and spreadsheets, not just 5-6 years ago. So the industry's been slow adopting technology, but the PE guys are really accelerating that. And I think that even though it's slower, right, you see like LMN, Aspire, Real Green, we've all been acquired by PE guys. So it's not just contractors, right? It's the software guys. So technology is definitely going to become something that people are going to have to do. Two more, then I'm done. Talent. I think we always talk about labor, the availability and quality of it being a problem. And I think that's true, but I think the real challenge is the middle management, right? If you look at what's going on in the universities and the schools that usually are the farm system for what I call middle management, account managers, top sales, production ops people, they're just not graduating. There's no one going to those programs anymore, right? So they're closing down some of these programs. And so owners are having a hard time not just getting crew guys, but in my mind, even more critically, the guys and gals in the middle. And I think the reason is because if mommy and daddy are paying for your education, they don't think landscape is going to let you make a lot of money. So they're going into engineering and other programs. And so I think it's really incumbent upon the industry, and maybe technology, Robert, plays into that, is the ability for an account manager to manage significantly more book of business, right? The ability for a production ops person to manage more crews, right? That makes them more valuable, and ultimately, right, they can be paid more, because you just can't pay people more because they want it. You have to pay people more because they do more, especially in contracting, right? We're not in a super cash-rich industry. And so I think technology can play a role in that. Matter of fact, that's part of the vision when I started Aspire, was we need to be able to help owners leverage their overhead staffing costs by giving them a tool that makes people happier, better, more productive, not just bloody busy every day. And I think the last thing, and you probably mentioned it, is, and I think COVID and the new administration is going to impact this I don't know to what extent. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball on it, but the average margins in the industry have always been, amazingly for 30 years, relatively lower than they should be, right? I mean, 5%. We did a benchmarking study with Greg Herring again this year, and once again, 5% to 6% is the average net margin, right? It's about what Brightview does. And so you need to make 10, 12% in this industry, really, to get a reasonable return on investment. So I can see COVID, taxes, changes in regulations, all the things Trump kind of did. Potentially they come undone, potentially they don't, but certainly it's a risk, right? So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the forecast as I see it, or what's important.
No, that's great information. And a couple of things that you touched on there, and I could go all these different directions, but when you talk about all these PE companies coming into the industry, but then you also mentioned, it's typically only 5% plus, net profit. What do you think the attraction is for these PE companies coming into the industry?
Well, cost of capital for PE guys is super low right now, right? And it's been super low for a while. The cap gains taxes have been attractive for people who want to cash out, right? And so that keeps multiples relatively in control. Recurring revenue, Robert, right? The chance to buy into recurring revenue with low capitalization, right? We say, yeah, it's a capital intensive business. It's not. Manufacturing is a capital intensive business. Buying trucks and mowers, not really. And so I think they see that as really attractive to them as investors, right? I mean, they're not really strategic buyers. They're buying to flip this out to someone else and those types of things. And you got to do it, right? I mean, you got to mow the lawn. You got to plow the snow. Yep. So, Yeah. Yeah. I think those things make it super attractive.
Okay, cool. Over to you, David.
Well, thanks. Kevin, you said something early on about you're a numbers guy. You come from CNL in your background. Talk a little bit about the importance of business owners knowing their numbers, in this industry, but really any industry, to maximize the return you were just talking about. How do you get from 5-6% to 10 to 12%?
Yeah. I mean, great question. Overall, and that's how I made a living for 25 years, because guys did not know their numbers and they hired me to help them understand their numbers. And obviously it's critical, right? I mean, it's critical to understand your numbers because most of these contractors will be in multiple lines of business, right? Which means those businesses have different price sensitivities or commoditization facets to them. You got overhead to cover. And so there's a bit of science into the finance to know how to cover your overhead, but also marry that to what the market will bear and what should I sell. And so, owners, in my experience, want that. But what was lacking, I think, because I did this for a living, David, right? I mean, I'd go in and spend 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 days in the beginning to help guys unwind their crummy QuickBooks, chart of accounts stuff, to figure out where the costs really were and to put those into categories that they could properly understand. And they would unbelievably realize that they weren't making money in 2 lines of business they thought they were, perhaps, right? And to show that, but then the challenge after that became, how do you get them to manage that, right? So that you could unwind the books in 4 days and give them a lesson, but from then on out, someone had to go out and put time on a time card, go buy something, make a bid, right? Do all the things you do in business, which is transactions. And frankly, that's why we really created Aspire, as a way to manage transactions, capture those, and make them obvious to the owner, almost like a cash draw on a day-to-day basis, right? You can see, did I make money today? Not like, how did we do in March? Well, April 15th, we got the QuickBooks and it says we lost money. I'm like, really? How do you even know? You probably have all kinds of accounting timing problems here that your GPs aren't even, you know what I mean? It's so essential today to do that, so you don't make bad decisions about how you price stuff, what businesses you spend more time in. It's a whole series of things that, and believe me, the industry has come a super long way. I'm not the only guy. There's Frank Ross. There's all kinds of other guys who've been around the industry who have spent their lives trying to teach contractors who are probably super good at operations. Most of them are, some good at sales. Very few came out of some environment where they said, hey, I'm a finance guy working for IBM. I think I'll start a landscape company, right? That doesn't happen a lot.
So I guess what you're saying, Kevin, is bottom line is, even though it may not be your passion or what you really love, you have to force yourself to dive into your numbers every month, every quarter, to really know, to make strategic decisions to grow your business.
All the time. And I find most of them really enjoy it, actually, when you start to take the mystery out of it. I mean, it's one thing to have cash on the balance sheet, which is like, okay, we're doing well. Like you may not be, right? You may be overinvested in X, underinvested in Y. And I think most of them ultimately really enjoy doing it, right? You gave them a method to see it, which before they didn't really have, right? So it just looked like a big blur.
Yeah, good point. So I want to stay on the finance part, but go to what you were just talking about, the cost of capital. That's machinery, equipment, trucks, all of that you need. But talk a little bit about the cost of capital of what you just talked about. So many times we think that if we add a person, it's just a cost. But how do you, as a business owner, you measure the cost of that capital, worth the investment in that capital, hiring the right person, the ROI you can achieve? Or, in an industry that sometimes has turnover challenges, the cost to you as a business that turnover, costs you. How do you manage all that?
Yeah, I think there are two things. One is, how do you measure it, and what's the benchmark to say that's a good return, right? Like this past year in London Landscape Magazine, I'm a columnist, and I wrote 4 articles on exactly what you're talking about. And I call these what I call KPIs, or leverage ratios. And there are three that really matter, right? Because I invest in labor hours, right? I have to buy crew hours. I invest in overhead to support that crew. And then I invest in machinery, equipment, et cetera, right? To support the crew. And the reason anyone invest or buy those things is to produce revenue, right? And so every leverage ratio is a productivity ratio, right? KPI, key productivity indicator, right? That says revenue in the numerator and the cost in the denominator, right? And you can come up with what are very obvious and true benchmarks for labor, overhead, especially staff, right? And equipment that tells you you're over, under invested or getting the proper return, right? And those things tie very directly to the bottom line, right? If you don't have good ratios in some of those, they just bleed off the net profit, right? You're not generating enough revenue for that cost, which means your net's going to be down, right? So I think a lot of folks, I always started from how do I fix the net? Look at the P&L. Like, no, you got to go back and look at what you're investing in. First of all, are you getting reasonable returns? Because if your labor leverage is too low, one or two things is happening. You have a crappy control in your hours going out on jobs, or number two, you didn't price it right in the first place, right? That's a problem, right? Or I'm over invested in overhead. Well, where and whom, right? That gets down to an organization chart problem. I can manage it. I can manage pricing. I can manage my organization chart. I can manage the systems that I have those overhead people use, right? The one that's consistently lowest return is equipment. Not everyone, many people are overinvested in equipment. And some of that ties back to the idea that guys love their toys. So we always got lots of toys in the yard, right? And stuff. And we like them new all the time, right? And so, but that won't kill you, right? I mean, being under leveraged on equipment is not nearly as bad as being under leveraged on labor and overhead, if that makes sense. But it gives you very specific things you can manage, right? I mean, I can go in and change the chart, how many I have, how much I expect them to do, and what tools I give them in systems, right? Because that's my job. I got to build in a system. And on labor, pretty simple. To me, it's either pricing or you didn't watch your budgets, right? End of the day.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Almost every single business, no matter what it is, including landscaping, has 2 or 3 levers that you can control to, affect the top and bottom lines of what it is. So it's Absolutely. knowing what those levers are and knowing when to use those levers. Too many times we all sit around in a bucket of hope that things will get better. We hope it will get better. Well, it doesn't always. All right, Robert, I'll be quiet now. Back to you, bud.
Okay. So Kevin, you've gone into a company, you've pulled back that mystery of around the numbers. They've got a little bit more foresight in what they need to do to improve their bottom line. But what other typical breakthroughs do you see when you go into a company and suddenly the light bulb moment comes on with 2 or 3 items and suddenly they're tremendously scaling up their business? What have you seen over your experience?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things. I mean, one thing just to say off the top, right? If you look at the industry and we think there are 80 to 90,000 quote landscape, snow, lawn care, tree arbor related businesses, right? 90% of those will never be bigger than $1 million, right? Which is 4 crews, maybe the owner, right? Because they can see it and manage it. So that means a very small percentage of the industry actually scales above $1 million, right? And then a very even smaller percentage scales above 10 million. Like you did it, right? You did it at ILM. Others have done it, but that's a relatively small group of people, right? You can count them in the hundreds, right? Out of 80, 90,000 of these quote SIC code guys that actually do it. And so that does make them rather unique, I think. So one thing is the owner, right? I think the scale is the owner has to understand what her job is ultimately to scale. And for me, it's the 2 C's, culture and customer, right? As the owner, manager, founder of Aspire, those are my 2 jobs. I looked at the P&L occasionally and things like that. And I looked at our numbers, but I felt my job every day was number 1, never lose a customer. And if there was a problem, fix it. And number two is, are my people happy, productive, and are we paying them properly and giving them a place where they can succeed, right? That was my job at Aspire, I always felt. I didn't get into this, it's amazingly, I never got into the spreadsheets and forecasts and projections. I left that to other people because I think if you're going to scale, someone has to be the customer advocate. I think it's the owner, most of the time. So I think the owner has to understand that they got to get out of ops and sales. They got to get into culture and customer, right? Number two, systems. Man, this is why the PE guys purchase these companies. Go in and install a system and make it more efficient, right? This is it, right? Because we're not creating a lot of new products in the landscape snow business industry, right? I mean, we do basic functional stuff. So they're not buying a company say, hey, we're going to change your whole product approach to the world. It's no, we mow lawns, we build stuff, we take away stuff. And so what they lack typically are the systems, and very specifically systems that allow you to manage every day, not just workflow, right? That's important, but also what am I responsible for? Did I win today, right? As an account manager, how do I know I won or lost, right? Because you manage these people. At the end of the day, they tell you, how did the day go? Oh man, really busy, got a lot done. I'm like, yeah, name something. What goal? Did you sell something? How much? Where is that in line where you should be, right? And so I think those systems become super important because people like to know, am I winning or losing? And don't make my job any harder than it needs to be. So systems are critical. I think the third thing, and this is interesting, it's if you're going to scale, you need to understand how to make a net profit north of 10 more than 1 year in a row. You know what I mean? It's like organizations and sports and stuff. You got to win to win. In other words, you can't keep saying, hey, next year. In other words, to really scale, you got to put money on the bottom line to allow you to have the capital and just the sense of success that comes with producing a bottom line, right? I've never really seen a lot of companies scale super successfully unless they've been able to consistently put 10 plus on the bottom line, right? Over time. Does that make sense?
Yep. No,
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people that almost equate that to, having that cash is almost like fuel for your business. There's a whole story around Southwest Airlines where you really need that jet fuel to be able to scale, grow their company.
Yeah.
And without that, then, they're struggling. So I agree 100%.
Yeah, I don't think it's terribly rocket science, but it seems difficult sometimes to do what I just mentioned, right? Which is, hey, if we're going to scale, we need to figure out how to make 10%, right? So, and that's going to be a combination of pricing, staffing, business lines we're going to be in. Like we just recently I did a webinar using Aspire data. And what was really interesting, which I didn't really suspect, but I really wasn't thinking about what to, expect, was that the gross margins that people made, high to low, right? High to low, and were not, in other words, small companies, large companies, gross margins weren't any different high to low. So size didn't really drive the GP, right? Region, north, south, east, west. Yeah, labor costs were different, but it didn't drive the GP. So what we found by looking at the analysis was it was your mix of business, right? And the relative margins in the different mixes of business that really drove it, right? And so if you had the quote wrong mix, right, you could look at it and you could find out that very quickly the problem was I'm selling too much of something at a price, because when you sell something, like construction, you can get 42%, let's say margin, or 40. Maintenance 48, enhancements 56, right? But maintenance requires a lot more overhead to manage it than a construction business does, right? So there's trade-offs, knowing about, okay, what margin should I sell something out to get max price, but also realizing that if I invest in some of the other higher overhead businesses, I'm going to put more overhead on my P&L, right?
Right.
But truly, what happened was, so it really comes down to, did I price it right, and did I have the right mix of my stuff, right? And that tended to be the explanation for higher profit companies. And this is $3 billion worth of revenue data out of Aspire, right? that didn't take that long to go find that, right? I mean, I got a
Right.
smart CFO guy who understands a pivot table, which I have no idea how that works, but was able to cut all the data and come up with some really interesting stuff, right? That can help managers go, okay, how do I make more money, right?
Yeah, no, it's nice having all that data behind you. David, I'm going to pass it back to you for, I think, our last question.
Cool. Thank you. 80 to 90,000 businesses in the same space. Competitive forces are always going to come into play when you talk about pricing. How do you separate yourself from the I can do it for $10 cheaper person who's coming up behind you to steal business away from you?
Yeah, that question just bothers everyone all the time. You know,
I'm asking you, and we know you have the answer to it.
Yeah. You know, I mean, it's the answer is not terribly complicated. The execution of it, I think, is more complicated. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the prices are low because you mentioned it before, David. People do not know their costs, first off, right? So there are people out there pricing stuff because they flat out don't know their cost. And somehow they think that's the competitive benchmark in the market, right? It's not. So number one, I tell people is don't worry what the other guy's doing. You need to first cover your overhead, right? Period. Done. If we can't make money in that line of business, we'll find a way to make money in that line of business or get out of it. Number two then really becomes execution. When I used to do my benchmarking stuff back in the old days, I was pretty regularly able to prove that if the companies with higher retention rates made better net margins. So that meant, could you build a sticky experience with your customer that gave them no reason to leave and then actually motivated them to spend a little bit more with you, right? Because they trusted you with what you were doing for them, right? And so, building a sticky experience used to be really, and Robert might echo this, it's like, if they love their account manager, they never stayed. I mean, you could screw stuff up on the property, but if they love the account manager, they stayed. Well, things have changed today because account managers move around a lot more than they ever did, in my opinion and my experience. And so now technology plus the account manager, I think you've got online payment, right? You've got customer portal stuff. You've got immediate signing of work orders, right? Through computers and iPads and phones, right? I mean, you're going to see Uber type of stuff coming out where people are going to see where their crew is in terms of the day schedule, when they're showing up and when they're leaving, right? I mean, that's getting very close. So technology, I think, is changing the equation a little bit, right? That if they want to leave you, they're going to lose all that stuff that you provided. Easy payment, right? Online signing of stuff, issues management, right? All these things where they felt that, in other words, it's service, right? You can play the price or service game. It's the same in any industry, but stickiness makes it pay off, right? Because you don't lose as many, you get more upsells. And I think technology just helps that. I mean, Robert could tell you, I mean, the level of inefficiency at the account manager level is staggering, in my opinion, right? They piss away so much time every day because they're A, not organized, B, don't have the technology, and they're constantly in response mode, right? And so they're exhausted by the end of the day because they're like, I worked my butt off, but I didn't get ahead at all, right? So, yeah, I mean, service, to answer your question on the price stuff. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Kevin. I know we could easily have another session just along the other point you mentioned about all the middle managers and how do you fill that void, as a lot of people are now not going to colleges. So maybe we'll get you back on in the near future. But Kevin, really appreciate your time today. Some great answers. I'm sure this is going to be of value to our listeners. So happy holidays to you all. Talk to you soon. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah,
you too. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, happy holidays. Merry Christmas, you guys.
See you later. See you, Robert.
Hopefully that was pure dead brilliant for you and you managed to get a few nuggets for your business from our chat with Kevin Kehoe. One of the main messages I heard was the need to leverage technology to really make sure the account managers become those superstars. This is David Anderson, Robert Clinkenbeard. We have one ask for you. Please tell your your business colleagues and your network about the show and to subscribe. Check out thecommerciallandscaper.com or any of the podcast channels such as Spotify or Apple. One other important message before you go. On our Commercial Landscapers website, this displays the logo and link of our exciting new sponsor called Site Recon. Their platform fully automates measurements so that you can focus on sales. Think measurements, think Site Recon. Choose your own.